All right, so lifting and moving patients. Let's just hop right into this one. It's a pretty basic one, but still some good fundamental things for you guys to know about. So very common for us to have to move patients. Not every patient is going to be ambulatory. Some patients are fall patients, some patients are unconscious. We may need to move them from the bed, from the floor, from a chair, all sorts of different things that we're going to have to do. As well as moving them on the gurney, on a backboard, on a stair chair, all sorts of different apparatus that we're going to use to do this. So it's important to have a good understanding of how we're going to move these patients, in large part so we don't injure the patients, which obviously is not what we want to do, right? We're there to help our patients, not injure them, and also to injure ourselves. That's something we need to avoid. That's a reason a lot of people have to get out of this career. Is due to injuries, and in large part that can be because of improper lifting techniques. So knowing good lifting techniques can be really important to reduce patient injuries and also to extend your careers and make sure that your career doesn't end due to a lifting injury. So one of the main things that we are going to use less to lift patients, but to move patients is going to be the wheeled ambulance stretcher. You might hear it called a cot or a gurney. Just kind of depends on where you're at, what we're going to call it. But this is a standard thing that we're going to move our patients around on. They can weigh different amounts dependent on if they're an older manual gurney or a newer hydraulic gurney. So older gurneys, we are the ones that actually do the lifting with those gurneys. There's a bunch of different brands, so we're not going to get too specific into it, but a manual gurney, you are the one actually lifting the patient. A lot of places now, at least if it's in the budget, have gone to hydraulic power lift style gurneys. And so those have batteries, they have hydraulic systems on them, and you'll just press a button and it will lift the patient. So obviously if the gurney is at about waist height for us, it'll be difficult to get the patient on there. So we'll drop the gurney down for the patient to sit on, for us to lift the patient onto the gurney, and then we will lift the patient up. Due to the large amount of other things on the hydraulic gurneys, the hydraulic fluids and the batteries and the electronics and all of that, they tend to be much more heavy. So that's why you're going to see this big variation in the different weights. The old school manual gurneys don't have all that, and they're much lighter. The newer hydraulic gurneys are going to be much more heavy, but they do a lot of the work for us. So there's a bit of a trade-off there, depending on which kind of gurney that you have. Typically, we're not going to bring these gurneys up or down stairs, especially these newer gurneys that weigh over 100 pounds. That's really difficult. So you might see maybe there's just a single stair at the entryway or something like that. We might bring the gurney past that, but if there's maybe 3 or more stairs, we're generally going to bring the patient to the gurney and not bring the gurney to the patient at that point, just because that's a lot of weight to carry. And we have other methods of getting patients downstairs and wherever they're willing to go. So the gurneys typically aren't going to be used when stairs are involved. So if possible, we would like to move the patient manually by using something that rolls. We can carry the patient, but if we have something with wheels, that's going to be generally a lot better because that's less stress on us and less likelihood of injury. So there's all sorts of different devices we can use. Like I mentioned before, there's stair chairs, which can be kind of used like a gurney. Kind of use like a wheelchair. If you're doing some backcountry rescue, you might have a Stokes basket that they essentially attach like a mountain bike wheel to that they can roll around. There's all sorts of different ones. I have personally many times used a computer chair from the patient's bedroom or office or whatever, sat them on that to help wheel them out to the gurney. But we typically want to use a wheel device if possible, just to reduce strain on ourselves. And some patients can walk, some patients we don't want to walk. And so we're going to try to get one of these if that's the case. Like I said before, there's lots of different brands, there's lots of different equipment. So make sure that you're really familiar with that equipment when you get out there. You don't want to have the 300 plus pound patient that you're not sure how to use your gurney, all this equipment, and now you have a very large patient that you need to move because they're unconscious. And it's, for whatever reason, a lot of the time you'll have very heavy patients that just love to be on a third story, fourth story walk-up apartment. So that just is just the way it goes sometimes. So knowing your equipment is really going to help you to manage that, and also to manage it safely. If you're not sure how to use a stair chair and you're trying to put a patient on the stair chair to go down a flight of stairs, that's dangerous for you and the patient. So you really need to be familiar with the equipment that you're going to be using. Take your time, get out there, get your hands on it, ask your partner, ask your training captain, whatever you have at your disposal, get some knowledge on how to use these things correctly. YouTube is a great resource as well, so that you're not potentially injuring your patient or yourself when we're moving patients around. So typically for the stretcher, there's going to be a head end and a foot end. If you watch a movie or a show typically now where they use a stretcher, you'll notice they always do it backwards. I don't know why, but it's very common for them to use it backwards, but there is a specific head and foot end. Typically the foot end is where the controls are going to be, so that's one way to recognize it. And then the head end can go fully up to a 90 degree, so the patient can sit fully up. Typically the foot end can go up a little bit, depending on what patient positioning you want your patient in. But you want to make sure that they're in there the right way, so that way you can manipulate the head to the angle that you want it. There's a big, strong frame, and then there's going to be guardrails to keep the patient from falling out. Dependent on what kind of gurney you have, Stryker now has, and maybe some of the other brands, I'm just more familiar with Stryker personally, they have kind of wings on the side. So old school would be rails that would slide up and down to protect the patient, kind of like what you would see in maybe a hospital bed, those big rails that come up. A lot of the Strykers now, the newer ones, have wings that will flop down, and they'll come up and down around the patient. So it's really nice to accommodate larger patients that maybe aren't going to fit within those rails very well. Those wings will come up and still give them that protection and keep them from rolling out, but you don't have to squeeze them as much because they have a little more flexibility in the size. There's an undercarriage. Depending on what you carry, you may have a spot to carry some equipment on the undercarriage. That's not always the case. There's going to be a mattress, and that should be fluid resistant. That doesn't mean we don't need to clean it, but you get blood, you get bodily fluids on there, vomit, whatever. You can generally take these off and you can hose them down. Hopefully the hospital that you're dropping off at has a hose or something, but you can typically decon them. They're meant to get bodily fluids and water and stuff on them. And then there's also going to be straps for the patient. There's a couple different strap systems. You'll just have to know what that looks like wherever you end up, but make sure that you're putting the straps on the patient. This is a huge issue that sometimes patients don't get put into their belts, and we're driving maybe code 3 to the hospital, going freeway speeds and all of that, and that patient, if they're not secured, is very, very unsafe, and that's a good way to open yourself up to liability. So make sure you're strapping in the patient fully, dependent on your protocols and your EMS system, however they want it to be done. But don't just do, I've seen it a lot back in the day, just the legs or the hips and leaving the shoulders undone, because we're going to do an EKG and we need access to the chest. If you need to take those off to put the EKG leads on, then you have to do what you have to do. When you're done, strap it right back down. Typically, there's going to be kind of an X over the chest, like a racing harness. Make sure that's done at all times. So backboards are another piece of equipment that we're going to use. Backboards, depending on where you're at, a lot of places, these are kind of going out of favor. A lot of places are using backboards specifically just for patient movement, and we're not going to immobilize patients and transport them on backboards anymore. But it's still a great piece of equipment, even if you're not going to transport the patient on it, to lift the patient and maybe move them to the gurney. So say you have a patient in a small, maybe manufactured home with narrow hallways and all of that, and steps outside, you can't get the gurney to the patient. You can lay a patient on this backboard, lift them and carry them out to the gurney. and then just remove the backboard after. That's a very common thing that we're going to do. So typically they're going to be made out of plastic. Old school ones maybe were wood. Typically plastic. We don't want something porous as blood gets into it. So plastic, they're easy to clean. If you look at it, there's going to be a spot for the different strapping systems. So you have handholds on the side and then different spots for strapping systems, which you'll learn depending on what you carry and how that's all gonna look and how it's all gonna work. But they're heavy duty. They can take a pretty good amount of weight on them. So you can trust this equipment. It's gonna work well for you. Like I said, dependent on your protocols, it might just be used for carrying patients outside. I'm sure we'll get later into the different styles or the different responder placement and positions for when we're using a backboard and how to carry those. So when we're moving patients, always make sure that we're cognizant of what we're doing so that we are protecting you yourself. So use good form. Make sure you're aware of what you're doing. Make sure that your team is also using good form. We don't want our team to get injured as well. So make sure that you're keeping an eye on everybody. If somebody is in a poor position, don't call for the lift then. Wait for them to get into a good position so nobody's going to get injured. And then so we don't injure our patients. We don't want somebody to be in a bad position and we start to lift and they slip off that board onto the floor. And then maybe our minor fall patient becomes a major injured fall patient because we dropped them 5 feet onto their head, right? So we need to make sure that we're not doing that. This is something that really we need to train on and practice repeatedly. It's just like going to the gym. You're not going to be strong at deadlifts unless you go to the gym and deadlift every week, right? It's the same here. So this is something that you're doing. It's something you need to be actively thinking about, and if you haven't done it before, actively training it is a good idea. So whether that be loading the gurney to the back of the ambulance or lifting somebody on a backboard, whatever it is, not a bad idea to get out there. Some departments will have mannequins of a certain weight you can put on to practice lifting, maybe some sandbags or something like that. But get out there, get practice in it. If you don't have any experience lifting weights, and you're here taking an EMT course, this is a good time to start that and start to learn proper lifting technique, especially if you're small or you don't have that history of any sort of weightlifting or anything. Start to put on some muscle, get some lifting technique. It's not all, you don't have to be some big, huge, strong dude. If you go and look at powerlifters, weightlifters, you'll have, I don't think she really is a competitive powerlifter anymore, but Steffi Cohen, she weighed about 125 pounds and could deadlift over 500 pounds back in the day. If you have really good technique, you can lift a lot of weight safely, but you need to learn that technique and you need to hone that technique. So if you've never done that before and you're going through an EMT class, it's a good idea to start now. Maybe find some good videos online, find a personal trainer, somebody that can teach you some good basic lifting technique. Because lifting the gurney off the ground is not that much different than lifting a barbell off the ground. We always want to do this in an orderly, planned, and unhurried manner. So if you've done this for a while, you'll see that we move with a purpose, but we don't rush. And that's how we do everything. Outside of maybe like a pediatric cardiac arrest, we're going to get out of the ambulance, we're going to get out of the fire engine, we're going to grab our equipment, we're going to move with a purpose, but we're going to be steady, we're going to walk, and we need to do the same, have that same mentality when it comes to moving patients. So, the likelihood of rushing and causing an injury is much higher than the patient dying because it took an extra 3 seconds to set up a move beforehand. So take your time. This is a team effort. If we're going to move a patient, we want everybody to have a plan of what we're going to do, where we're going to go, and we're all going to work as a synchronous team to make sure that happens. We don't really need to cover too much of the basic anatomy. You guys should know that by now. So your lifting position, this should be very similar typically to like a deadlifting position. So I used to be a power lifter. The way I would always think about it, or if somebody was asking me about like what's a good lifting position, where should my feet be, where should my hands be, all this stuff. the thing that I always like to tell people, everybody should know how to jump. Just stand and jump. So a good way to start to get this good lifting position is get your feet set like you're gonna jump up as high as you can, and wherever that is a really good starting position for your feet, okay? Same thing with like a deadlift, that's a good spot to start with your feet. And maybe you'll need to move in and out depending on your personal anatomy, and femur lengths and all sorts of stuff can affect this, but if you can start there, that's a good place to start, okay? You should be kind of stacked. We want our shoulders over our hips, over our feet, so that we're stacking all the way down. In general, the closer to our body our hands are, the better. Just like if you've done deadlifts before, or if you've seen high-level deadlifters, they're dragging the bar across their shins. And if I were to take anybody here and give them a 25-pound weight plate, if they held it against their chest, they could hold it there significantly longer than if it was stretched out. And it's the same thing with lifting. We're stronger inside, so we want to keep things nice and inside when we're lifting. And then we want to make sure our spinal column is erect. Okay, we don't want to hunch out our back. We need to have that spinal column erect, so we're going to come down, and we're going to keep our chest up and big, come down to lift, and keep that spinal column straight, okay? You might have a little bit of rounding, especially if you need to go all the way down in your lower back. Just make sure it's not exaggerated, and stack that spinal column so the force goes directly through and we're nice and stable. If you're doing all of that, for the most part, these lifts shouldn't be that hard for you, because if we start to have a really heavier patient, we'll have more hands to lift these patients. I hate this picture because this is not the correct way to lift. If you look at his spinal column, it's really rounded. So this is a very poor example, actually, of how to lift. His hips need to be in a little bit more. He should be a little bit lower. So he's kind of like this. He needs to be here. He needs to drop his hips in, get his hips a little closer to his hands for this lift. So like I said, really poor. This is a good example of what not to do. So ignore that this is the correct way. His hands are okay. He's got the double underhand grip. His foot positioning looks okay, but he's not stacked very well. So make sure that you guys get out there, you learn how to stack your body when you're going to be lifting these patients. For those that haven't seen it, this is the head of the gurney. As you can see, patient is sitting more of an upright position. So this is going to be the head of the gurney. This is where one of the two positions typically you'll be lifting from if you need to lift the patient while they're on the gurney with the old school manual gurneys. Stuff I kind of already talked about a little bit. So it says shoulder width, which is a good place to start, but like I was saying, how I like to teach it is just get your feet in a position like you're going to do a jump, and then that will get you a good start of where your feet should be. Everybody naturally should have jumped and should be able to do that without too much thought. Make sure that you're nice and balanced. You want your back upright. Remember, we're going to lift with our legs, not with our back. I'm sure you guys have heard that a million times, but the legs are the strongest muscle in our body, so we want to lift with our legs. We're going to grab that stretcher, and we want to keep our arms. We're not curling this patient up. We're going to use our legs, so we want to keep our arms, not locked, but in a nice solid position, and we're going to lift with our legs there. As far as we can. Sometimes if you're shorter, you will have to do a little bit of upper body to get the patient up and in the lockout position. But like I said, keep that weight nice and close to your body. This talks about the power grip. So that's going to be either side, about 10 inches apart on that backboard. This is actually a scoop stretcher, which I'm sure they'll talk about. But you want those palms up, fingers at the same angle. And we don't want to be grabbing with our fingers when we're holding. We want it up in our palms with our fingers wrapped around. Our fingers are a lot weaker. And so if we're just lifting just with our fingers like a rock climber, unless you are a rock climber, I guess, you're not going to be very strong in that position. So get your hand under there, get your palm in there, and lay that stretcher, whatever it is, in your palm, not on your fingers. It's about the same stuff here. Make sure that you're holding tight so you don't drop the patient. If you're holding with a backboard and you need to static hold for a little bit, one thing that I really like to do is use my belt. If I have a belt on with a nice belt buckle, you can kind of set the patient on your belt to give your arm a little rest if they're going to be on there for a while, just to take a little weight off and put it on your hips instead of on your arms. So reaching and pulling is something we need to do as well, and this is one of the big times that responders get injured, is for the reaching and pulling. So this is something we're going to do all the time at the hospital. You know, it's easy. We can lift our patient onto the stretcher, onto the gurney. We'll wheel them out, get them in the ambulance. We'll get into the hospital, and now they need to go from our stretcher to the bed. And so sometimes patients are able to stand and transfer. Sometimes they can scoot themselves over, and sometimes we need to move that patient. If we need to move that patient, we are either standing on one side and pushing them onto the bed, or we're standing on the opposite side of the bed, and we need to reach over and pull the patient in. And so this is actually one of the times that we see a lot of shoulder injuries and back injuries in responders, is doing those moves. So again, important for you to have good technique when you're doing this. And then we might need to do this at the home as well. So patients in the middle of a bed, we might need to pull the patient towards us to get them off of the bed. If they're on the ground in a poor position, maybe they're stuck. The proverbial patient that passes out on the toilet and stuck between the toilet and the bathtub or the wall, we might need to pull them. So again, just make sure that you have really good, proper form when you're doing this to protect yourself. So keep your core locked. So you know, like your Arnold Schwarzenegger showing off his abs or whatever. You want to kind of not bear down's not the right word, but hold that stomach nice and tight. Kind of bring your belly button back into your spine to hold those ab muscles nice and tight. Have that core nice and tight. It says not to extend your hands more than 15 to 20 inches in front of you. And in a perfect world, that's great. If that's possible, then don't do that. We don't live in a perfect world, so you might have to do that. Just when you're doing that, the same principles apply. If you need to reach out far, you don't want to be rounding your back and reaching here. You want to bring your hips in, bring your shoulder blades back, get in this good, strong position, tight core, right? Nice, strong back, and we're going to pull here. We're not going to pull like this. So get in here and then pull there. Okay, just again, if you're not a regular gym goer, you've never been to the gym, it's not a bad idea for you to get to the gym, do like a seated row, standing row. That's going to start to build these same pulling muscles, and you can build up with lighter weights and start to get your form. It's going to translate really, really well for you. So body drag is what they're doing here. This is to get a patient out of a different area. This is going to be more of a lateral movement if we have to. You'll not really here. This is one thing where sometimes grabbing the patients can be hard. So clothing is always a good option if you need to drag a patient. Having multiple responders is always helpful. One on each side if possible is good. But if they have like a belt or belt loops, those are a good nice place to grab to help you slide along with these patients. Kind of talked about dragging along a bed. You can kneel on the bed if you need to, especially if they're on some big old king size bed and they're plop in the middle of it. That's a good distance. Or maybe they have a big king size bed in the corner of a room and they're sleeping up against the wall, or they're laying up against the wall. It's okay for you to jump up on that bed, get on your knees, kneel over, get a couple of you next to each other and pull them as you go along. Using the sheet under the patient that's a pro move right there. If they're laying on something, you can undo that from around the bed, and that's what you can use to pull. That's going to be a lot easier to slide that sheet along the mattress than it will be to drag the whole patient across the sheet. So you can do that, and now you have a nice sheet to move that patient onto the gurney with. Sheet moves or blanket moves are a super common thing that we do out there in the field to move patients. So that's definitely something that you can do. I've seen people stand up on the bed. I try to avoid that. Kneeling is much better. Sometimes it's just an awkward angle. There's not enough space for you to kneel. But if possible, try to be from a kneeling position, not a standing position if we're going to have to move these patients. I already talked about this a little bit as far as moving the patient over onto the the bed in the hospital. If you're on the far side, especially if I have little short T-Rex arms, so sometimes I would get up and kind of kneel on the bed to give myself a little bit of extra reach. You can do that. The nice thing about hospital beds and stretchers is we can get them at the height that's most comfortable for us. So this is what we're talking about doing like a well-executed move. You can move the beds, match them up so they're even, get them to a height that's good for you. You don't want to be too low. You don't want to be trying to pull from too high. Get it right, waist level for you, or something that at least is good for you and your partner if you guys are different heights. But take the time to get that to where you need it before you start to shift over. Make sure the heads are matched up, all of that stuff. The hospitals typically will have slider boards as well. And so that's just kind of a thin, hard plastic board you can put under the patient to kind of bridge from your stretcher to their bed. And the sheet that they're on will slide nice and smooth over that. It's like they're on an ice skating rink. So that's another thing that you can do to make it a little bit easier. These guys are doing a log roll. This is a common way for us to get the patient onto the backboard. So depending on how many responders you have, not always the more the better, but they have 4 here. I'd say that's about the max I would want to go. 3 or 4 is usually your best. You're always going to have the person at the head, and then you're going to have people on the side to help roll. I prefer, if possible, have 2 to roll here and 1 person on the other side to manipulate the backboard. But that'll be, however you like to do it. You'll figure that out once you maybe handle these in class or get out there in the field to handle backboards. And I'm sure this is going to come up later, but the main thing to remember when you're log rolling is the head person's in charge. If we're putting somebody in a C-collar, if we're putting them on a backboard, there's a high possibility that maybe we're concerned about a spinal injury, and we don't want to start rolling the patient, having the patient's hips go this way and their head stay this way. We don't want to manipulate the spine that way. So if this is the situation that we find ourselves in, that we need to put a patient on there, have somebody holding that manual C-spine, and they're going to call the move. And I really like to be specific about it. We're rolling to my left side on 3, 2, 1, go. Whatever it is, just make sure everybody knows what we're doing before we do it. Again, it might come up later. I don't remember specifically, but I also like to have, if this middle guy wasn't here, I like to cross arms. So person up here will be on the shoulders and then kind of more down on the hips, the upper leg. Person down low will be around the lower leg and then up on the hips, and then cross those hands when you roll. I just feel like it's a little bit more of a powerful position for everybody to roll those patients over. So when you're here, you want to kneel close to the patient. Again, the closer, the stronger we are. So we want to kneel. We're going to roll into ourselves, and then we'll bring the backboard up against the patient. I like to do a bit of an angle, and that's why I like to have somebody on the other side when we're log rolling. Get it right up against the patient, scooted under them a little bit if you can, and have it at that angle. And then on the head person's count, we're going to roll back, and then whoever's manipulating the backboard, try to almost kind of scoop a little bit underneath the patient as it goes to help center the patient right off the bat. We can do a Z-track to move the patient more centered, but if we can scoop them and get them more centered to start with, it's going to help quite a bit. Let's see. That's all the stuff we talked about already. Okay, so some principles, probably a little bit repeating ourselves at this point, but we'll kind of talk about it. When possible, we're going to use a device that can be rolled. We've already covered that quite a bit. It's a good idea to get an idea of the patient's weight before lifting. It says adults often weigh 120 to 220 pounds. Not that I've seen, maybe in Europe, but Americans are quite rotund commonly, and the sicker patients that call us more often tend to maybe have a less healthy lifestyle, and so we see a lot of heavier patients. The elderly population tends to be a little thinner and lighter, but we see a lot of heavier patients, so keep that in mind. But that shouldn't be too hard. Somebody of average, 150, 200 pounds, that shouldn't be too hard. for 2 EMTs to lift. But we start getting above that is when we need to start considering maybe we want some extra hands to help us lift those patients. And it's always a better move to ask for that extra help than it is to hurt somebody. So if you are the dude that's at the gym all the time, you think you're super strong, just leave your ego at the door when you go to lift patients. You know, we're not there to show off how strong we are, who has the best mustache, who cooks the best chili, whatever, right? We're there to take care of our patients and to make sure our patients are safe. And so leave the ego at the door. If you have a heavy patient, get some other people in there and lift them safely with multiple patients. You need to know the weight limits of your equipment and what you're going to do if patients exceed those limits. There are limits to all of our different equipment, so know what those limits are. I know the Stryker gurneys typically have that number displayed on there. So I want to say the old school manuals are like 600 pounds and the new hydraulics are 650 or 700. That could definitely be off, but it's posted there. You can see what your weight limits are on your different equipment, and make sure you're following that. You don't want to have a gurney collapse or a stair chair break or something because the patient's too large. So make sure that you're thinking about that, and sometimes you're going to have to do a lot of pre-planning and a lot of different things to get patients around safely if they are bariatric, very large patients. There are specific bariatric gurneys. Some places will have a specific bariatric ambulance. Some of those bariatric ambulances typically have an actual winch inside the back of the ambulance, and they have ramps, so we don't need to lift patients into the back of the ambulance. So we'll lay the ramps down, and then we'll winch the patient from the floor, they'll ride up the ramps into the back of the ambulance. There's a lot of different specific bariatric equipment, so make sure you know your capabilities there. And if that patient needs to go in one of those, they need to go in one of those. Unfortunately, that's just the case. I had a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the chest on a patient who was like 600 pounds. And it was one of those decisions we had to make. Do we wait on scene and try to get a bariatric gurney? He wasn't over our gurney's weight limit, but we had to think and make that decision on what we were going to do. And unfortunately, in that situation, thankfully he was able to fit on the gurney. But as my supervisor said, unfortunately, either he fits on our gurney or he's probably going to die here because it's going to take too long for that bariatric gurney to get there. So just things you need to be thinking about when you have these patients. Most of the patient's weight when you're lifting is going to be on the head side. So keep that in mind when you're going to lift. Typically have the stronger person or people on the head, or if you're going to have multiple people lifting, the head's going to be the better position for that. When it comes to the gurney, the head side's typically higher. For the most part, the foot side is where the handles are. And they're the person that's operating the carriage to go up and down. But there are usually higher and lower handles. And so if you have somebody who's 5'2", they might struggle on the head because it's going to be really high for them. They can be a little lower on the feet, and it's a little lighter. So typically that's going to be a better position for them when you're lifting patients on the gurney and backboard as well. The diamond carry can be pretty helpful. That's going to be a picture of the diamond carry. So 2 on the sides, 1 on the front, 1 on the back. That's one way that we can carry with a backboard with 4 people for a heavier patient. You can also do all 4 corners as well. Whatever kind of works best for everybody. Those are two different options that you have. When we're wheeling around the stretcher, typically we'll want to be at that elevated position. That might be a little bit different, like the bariatric gurney. It's not uncommon that we'll wheel that a little bit lower just because that's a lot of weight sitting up high. And remember that when you're wheeling these around, that is a lot of weight. The center of gravity is really high on these. And so you don't want to take a corner, hit a rock or something that stops the wheel and have them tumble over. Make sure you're really cognizant Everybody should have hands on the stretcher at all times. Front and back should have hands on the stretcher at all times. And just make sure you're aware of what you're doing when you're pushing that around. And this is something too, if you've never pushed an ambulance stretcher before, it's not like driving a car. They're a little bit different because they typically have 4 freewheels. And so you need to learn to start to maneuver that correctly around corners. I remember when I was brand new, it was like I was Tokyo Drift everywhere. Like if I was on the back, I was swinging the back way around and not being direct through corners. And so it's a learned skill. Take some time if you haven't done it before to get out there and practice how you're going to push that gurney. So this is going to be a stair chair. This is something that we can use for a conscious, let me make sure you guys see that, conscious patient. We're not going to put somebody slumped over. They need to be able to hold their own body weight up. But this is going to allow us to move patients down the stairs. So typically they'll be set up kind of like a wheelchair. So this can be used like a wheelchair if needed. It's not super maneuverable. They're pretty narrow, but they can move around. They're not great over carpet too, so keep that in mind. But it's going to have the seat. There's going to be some straps to strap your patient down. I love to do the straps and then instruct the patients because they're going to be freaked out. If you're floating them down some stairs, they're going to be freaking out. So I like to tell the patients to grab the straps and not let go. Gives them something to hold on to keep themselves feel a little more secure. You're going to have the straps, and then on the back side, there's going to be this little track. And so you will lean the stair chair so that track runs along the stairs. And that's going to help to take their weight so we don't need to carry down the stairs. And then we'll also put some resistance. It'll help to slow you down those stairs. There's handles down at the foot that can pop out, and there's a handle at the top that will come out. And so we stand above and below the patients, get to the stairs. We're going to rock them back a little bit, line up that track along the angle of the stairs, and we'll wheel them along the stairs along this track. Like I said, it puts a little resistance so they don't just slide down easily. But they need to be conscious. They need to be strapped in. They need to be looking up, holding their own body weight. Really instruct them to not reach out. That's super dangerous. If they reach out and grab a banister or reach out and grab something, that can be really dangerous for us. And for them. So make sure they're not doing that. And then typically there will also be a footrest. And sometimes there's going to be a strap for the feet as well. You might want to strap their feet in. I like, if I'm just moving this around on the carpet or just, the kitchen floor or whatever, I like to go backwards just because patients regularly will take their feet off of that footrest and they'll put them down towards the ground and then they'll get trapped underneath, or they can get sucked underneath the stair chair. So I like to go backwards if I can, that way, because patients are not great at following our instructions all the time. That will help to minimize the likelihood of them getting their feet ran over by us as we're pushing them around. Kind of what we talked about already, a backboard should be used if we have a patient where there's some stairs around. So backboards are great for unresponsive patients, but we need to make sure that they're going to be immobilized. So you'll know what your use of the backboard is depending on your protocols once you get out into the field. Make sure you follow those. If you're going to you put a patient on the backboard, make sure that they are strapped to the backboard. And then if you're going to keep them on the backboard, once they're on the gurney, we need to secure the patient to the gurney as well. So the backboard straps are not enough. If they're onto the gurney, we need to use those gurney straps as well as the backboard straps. We don't undo the backboard straps. Keep them strapped to the backboard and then the gurney on top of that once they're strapped to the gurney. For loading into the ambulance, there's a couple different systems of how that's going to happen. Honestly, a lot of that's going to be easier for you to see once you get out in the field and you see your actual equipment. But some of them are going to be manual. You're going to load the wheels up here at the head. Those are going to go into the back of the ambulance, and then we'll lift the frame. Your partner will lift up the carriage underneath, and then we'll slide it in. At least the striker style is going to be that way. But it's typically something along those lines. And then there's like an antler system where there's going to be a catch up at the front where those wheels are going to go, and a little thing on the side, and there's a post. It's hard to see in this picture, but there's a little post sticking up right here. And so you'll load the front, and then you will swing the bottom around, and it will catch into that little catch there, and it'll hold the gurney securely. So that's the common system that you're going to see for the old manual gurneys. And you can do it with the hydraulic gurneys as well. Most places, because of the weight of the hydraulic gurneys, use the lift system. So the Stryker has the auto load. There's other versions of it out there, but you're going to load it into that. The top end is going to get clicked into that, and then attached to the gurney, there's some rails that come out, and they'll lift the stretcher up, and as it's doing it, it will also bring the legs in. If you just look up the Stryker auto load system, there's videos out there you can see. It's a pretty basic thing. Just know again what you have out there. I talked a little bit earlier about the wings on the side of the gurney. This is a good example of those. So if you were to look at an older picture of a gurney, they probably had rails, like bed rails, like you would see in the hospital beds, that went back and forth. These are the wings that flop down and up and kind of help catch our patient. Like I said, they're much better for larger patients. I already talked about that. So really important, like I said before, all this needs to be coordinated. Team leaders should be the one who's giving those instructions. If you're an EMT student who's 19 years old, and you got a crackly teenage voice and stuff still and all that, if you walk on scene with some confidence and you're put in that position, and there's a 40-year fire captain who could be your dad sitting there with, with salt dripping off of him because he's been around so long. If you're confident and you say, hey, we're going to do this on 1, 2, 3, he loves it. We're okay with having the new guy come in and give us direction as long as it's right direction. So if you're put in that lead role, as long as you know what you're doing, be confident about it, and then everyone's going to have confidence in you, and things are going to go more smoothly. Okay, so talking through things is really great. That's how I've always been as an EMT and as a paramedic. To me, teamwork is so important in what we do, and that's for everything. If I'm going to do a procedure, I'm going to talk out loud about what I'm doing to everybody, so everybody's on the same page, whether that be during an intubation, I'm talking about what I'm grabbing and the medications, and so everybody's, we're all on the same page, or lifting and moving patients. We're gonna use a backboard. We're gonna put the backboard here. We're gonna lift to the patient's right-hand side. Okay, firefighter 1, you're gonna take it, slide it under. We're gonna go here. We're gonna do this. Talking through everything before you do it quickly is a way to keep everybody safe. So not a bad idea to do that. Know kind of what your methods are. Whatever that is, that's fine. Different places are going to have different methods, different terminology. Just know, make sure everyone's on the same page beforehand. Maybe you're going to go 1, 2, 3, move, or maybe you're going to move 1, 2, 3 and move on 3. Everybody needs to know that before that move happens. So, if it's a crew you've never worked with before, or a partner you're not familiar with, establish that before we move so nobody gets hurt. So, okay, we're going to move on 3. 1, 2, 3. Or we're going to move after the 3. So 1, 2, 3, go. Everybody ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Just establish that beforehand so everybody's safe. And if possible, we want to think down the line. So what's going to involve the least amount of moving and carrying? Do we just want to put the patient on the stair chair and wheel them through the house to get to the stairs, and then wheel them to the gurney? That way we're not lifting the patient onto the backboard, carrying the backboard to the stairs, then get them on the stair chair, then stair chair to the bottom, then put them on the backboard again. Like, we want to avoid that. So, think a couple steps ahead. That sometimes is a large portion of the responsibility of the EMTs. Locally here where I've worked, this is something that the firefighters were phenomenal at. They were 5 steps ahead so often that I would be thinking critical patient care, whatever, and I would turn around and be like, hey, can we get the stair chair? And they're sitting there with the stair chair. This is sometimes, as an EMT, if there's more high-level procedures going on, there's not a lot you can do to help that, but you can think 5 steps ahead. What's going to have to happen, and how can I support that? And maybe that means grabbing some equipment, grabbing the scoop stretcher, grabbing those things, while the people that are doing the other stuff are involved in that. And you can really help to minimize that time and make all this go more smoothly, okay? Emergency moves when there's a potential for danger, which realistically is not very likely for us, but you might have to do some emergency moves. Say there's a house fire and you see the patient just right there, you need to pull them out, those kind of things. So make sure that if there is a potential for danger, is always make sure that you're thinking about your safety and your crew's safety first. You're not putting yourselves into a dangerous situation to go and do one of these patient moves. You can do a closed drag, so that's exactly what it sounds like. A blanket drag, which is again exactly what it sounds like. Arm drag and arm-to-arm drag. You'll see those. There should be some pictures of these, but this is where maybe we're a little bit less concerned about a spinal injury. Well, we are concerned about a spinal injury, but the risk to the patient's life is higher than the risk of the spinal injury. So we'll have to do something like this, but that doesn't mean that we need to just totally forget about the possibility of a spinal injury. And these things can help us to, maybe move the patient in a more fluid manner to not be cranking their neck all over the place. So closed drag, it's going to be A here. Like I said, just exactly like it sounds. Blanket drag is going to be similar. It's really easy. If you have a blanket on scene, you can take that patient, roll them up to the side. So you lay the sheet or the blanket next to them out, roll them to the side, shove half of that sheet or blanket underneath, roll them to their back, roll them the other way, and pull that bundled up sheet out. And now they're just laying on a sheet or a blanket, and they're great to move. So that's a great patient movement. You can just do an arm drag or the arm-to-arm drag. So this is a good, strong movement, but this does take a little practice. This is not one that I would tell you to just go try right now for patients. But definitely, I've definitely utilized this a lot. So you're going to go under the patient. Again, you want to kind of get below them, get in squat position, and then I like he's doing here. You're going to thread your arms under their armpits. And then I like to, just like he's here, have that good grip on the wrists. You might have them cross their arms, whatever, but you do that and they'll kind of lock their arms in under your arms, and you can lift them up like that. So you can drag them like that, or you can lift them onto a gurney if you need to. Say they're in the middle of a roadway and you're just trying to get them off of a roadway, whatever. It's good to have somebody down at the legs as well. Okay. I'm trying to remember what this is. There's a term that we use for it, and all I can think of is GS lift, and I think that's incorrect. But it comes from back in the day, from a street down in New Orleans where there were a lot of people heavily intoxicated, and this was a method they would use to lift people around. I can't remember. For some reason it's not coming to me, but I think it's the GS lift. I think it's Georgia Street, I think is where GS comes from. That won't be on the test, but a little bit of trivia for you. Removing an unconscious patient from a vehicle. This is something that we may have to do. It's really difficult to do it if you're alone. So we want to clear the legs of the pedals if they're on the driver's side, because that can kind of catch the legs. So make sure that you're clearing them out. You want to rotate them so their back is towards the car door. This can be a little bit hard with those pedals. So just keep that in mind. You're just going to have to do the best you have to here. And then we'll kind of do like a GS carry from there. So get their back towards you. You can kind of loop in under the armpits, get their head supported on your chest. Sorry if I just hit the microphone there. Grab their wrists, and then you can lift them out to get them out of the car. Just make sure you're really being cognizant of those feet. It can be a little bit difficult. I don't know if it comes up here, but the most common practice, most places now, when it comes to removing a patient from a vehicle that is conscious. This is different for an unconscious patient, obviously, but conscious patients, typically, if possible, we want them to stand and pivot. There's a lot of science now showing that a patient will do a better job of self-splinting and protecting their own neck in a difficult position, like getting a patient out of a car, than we will if we do the old school method where you're holding the spine, you try to lay them on the board. There's just a lot of spinal manipulation. So if possible, you'll just ask the patient, they'll be in a seated position, right, in their car. You'll get the gurney right next to it. You'll have them turn, keeping their head and neck in a neutral position. Help them to stand up. They can turn around and sit right down on that gurney. And then after they get out of the car, you can help to manage that spinal stabilization. So pretty common for us to have patients, if possible, stand and pivot out of vehicles. Urgent moves. These are kind of a step down where there are life threats going on with this patient, but they're not, immediate life threats like a fire or like an electrical wires down or those kind of things. So if you have to use one of these, try to be a little bit more aware of, spinal injuries, all of those things. Non-urgent moves are what we're typically going to do. So this is when the patients are grossly stable, or at least with the patient stable enough that we can spend a little bit of time. If you have to ventilate the patient on scene for an extra 2 minutes to get to have a safe move, then ventilate them for 2 minutes for a nice safe move, right? Again, not a bad idea to plan how you're going to move that patient beforehand, and then get everybody on the same page. Team leaders should be telling us what we want, how we're going to do things. Sometimes there might be a little bit of a discussion on how we're going to move this. This is a narrow doorway. Are we going to go with a backboard? If we go with a backboard, narrow doorway into a hallway, we might have to do a high-low situation to get them around that corner. Maybe we should do this instead, or there might be some discussion. And then once that's decided, then start to move towards that action. Direct ground lift, that's going to be for patients who are supine but don't have a suspected spinal injury. So that's something that we can do. You can do an extremity lift as well. This is all stuff that we've already covered. Transfer moves, again, stuff we've already covered. We have not talked about the scoop stretcher. So this is going to be dependent on if your service carries scoop stretchers. But a scoop stretcher is kind of like a backboard that can break apart. So let me see if we have a scoop stretcher here. Let me pull this in here real quick. Let me make it my height, not Michael Jordan height. Oh, it doesn't want to go. All right, well, because we're videoing this, we're just gonna roll with it. So, scoop stretcher is able, like I said, to break apart into 2 different pieces. So there's also a spot on the bottom that has the same little locking mechanism. So we can do that. So yeah, we can break this apart, and so this way we don't have to log roll a patient. These are really great. If you have a patient supine, you can break this down. You can either kind of like scissor them, so you'll have them laying down. You can put one side under and bring the other side under them, or you can have it completely broken down and then just bring the side from both sides and meet in the middle. You lock it in, and now this is a nice stable platform that we can move the patient around on. It's a lot faster than a backboard. Because we don't need to log roll all of those things. But this is, if you work for a service that requires patients to be transported on a backboard, the scoop stretcher does not fulfill that role. This is just for basic movement of patients with no suspected spinal injury. So just keep that in mind, but it is a really great piece of equipment if you have one. You can move the patient onto the gurney on that scoop stretcher. It should have some straps just like a backboard would or a gurney would. You can move them onto there, and then you can break it down again and pull it out from underneath the patient, and now they're resting comfortably on the mattress on the gurney. Okay, so it's a nice piece of equipment. The first service I worked at didn't have those. So, I don't know if that was because it was a long time ago or if it was just what that service had and didn't have, but you may or may not have one of those. If you do have it, again, practice with it, be comfortable with it. Geriatrics is something we need to be thinking about when we're moving them. They may have a couple different, they may have some kyphosis or something that we need to be thinking about that will give us a little special challenge. And they can just be a little more brittle. So be more gentle when you're moving these patients. We don't want to further injure them. They also have, they can have really thin kind of papery skin that is just prone to tearing. We don't want to cause skin tears as we're moving patients. So really think about that. And it can be really scary for all these, big, tall responders with their radio straps and their hats on, and then their, especially if they're there in their turnouts or whatever, to come and, we're going to carry you down the stairs and whatever. You might get I've heard some raunchy old ladies make some funny jokes, which always brightens my day, but you might get some scared patients too. So just make sure that you're talking through it. You'll hear a lot of the gallows humor. We have all told patients we only drop patients on days that end in Y all the time to try to break the tension. Or it's, we haven't dropped anybody yet today. Those kind of things to try to break the tension. Just read the room a little bit if you're going to make jokes like that, because I've seen that turn around and go sideways pretty badly before. Just think about that. Try to make sure that you're being, forthcoming with your patient. Be compassionate before you're going to move them. So these are some different, just kind of like kyphosis and some different spinal stuff that you may see. As you're looking at this, just think like, what am I going to do to move this patient? And if I need to backboard this patient, what am I going to do? Right? There's a lot of different times that you're going to have to get really creative out there, which is what a lot of us like about this job. That you need to think on your feet a little bit sometimes. But these are those patients that you're going to have to really think about what you're going to do with these patients. If you need to change what you normally would do, then that's what you need to do. If these patients need to be transported on their side instead of on this would be just crushingly painful on a backboard, right? The spinous process, just poking into that backboard, that maybe isn't a great option, right? So if it's within your protocols, maybe think of something else to do for these patients. There's air mattresses, there's all sorts of stuff. The back raft is one of them. There's a couple different kind of things like that you can use. But even just putting a C-collar on these patients is going to be difficult. So know it's within your scope and what you're allowed to do, but you might have to be creative with these patients. But as you're looking at this, start to think right now, like, what could I be doing? How could I be treating these patients? What are the difficulties that I might see with these patients? So bariatrics, these are going to be our obese patients. So 30 to 40% of adults are obese, with approximately 17% of children being obese. Obviously, in general, for these purposes, I think the fact that 17% of children are obese is pretty heartbreaking, just as a general statistic. But for our purposes of lifting and moving, an obese 4-year-old is probably less concerning than an obese 40-year-old, right? Because even if they're obese, they're much smaller. So that's a little bit less of a concern, but close to half of the population in the U.S. is obese. That's a lot, and like I said before, that's a lot of our patient demographic is going to be patients in poor health who obesity can lead to poor health. So we're going to see these patients more commonly. Back injuries is going to be the largest number of missed days of work in EMS, so that's something we need to always be talking about. I've talked about it enough already, but make sure you're protecting yourself when you're doing this. So here's a bariatric stretcher like I was talking about a little bit before. So it's hard to tell from the picture, but these are much wider than a normal stretcher. They also are heavier duty to allow more weight. And they also will tend to have these little handles. And so that way we don't have to have the patients all the way up high. We can keep them a little bit lower. Because if the gurney is really low, I can't push normally if the handles are down here. This will allow us to grip up higher and push almost like a shopping cart. We'll keep that center of gravity a little bit lower for these patients, because we definitely don't want them to fall or anything. It could be very difficult for us. I already talked a little bit about like the hydraulic, more commonly to see these now, styles of gurneys that you're going to see, electric powered, pneumatic, whatever it is, you're going to see them out there. A bunch of different types of stretchers, Stokes baskets. There's all sorts of things. We're not going to talk about them specifically. Just know what you have when you're out there. There's flexible stretchers for remote rescues, those kind of things. This is going to be the KED, Kendrick extrication device. This thing has been around since probably before most of you guys were alive. I've never personally used it in the field, but it's mandated, as far as I know, pretty much everywhere to have it out there. So you guys should see how to use this when you're out there in the field. But it's just a short backboard. This is meant for patients in a seated position to move those patients. A lot of the time, that's what the short backboards are going to be used for. A little pro tip for you guys, what I actually like this for, if you flip it upside down the way it's supposed to be used, it's really good for a hip splint. So that is my personal #1 usage for the KED. Like I said, I've never used it for a short backboard before, but that is the purpose of it. The conspiracy theorist side of me thinks that they just are in cahoots with our EMT, because I've never seen anybody actually use it, but it's on every ambulance. They're all out there. Vacuum mattresses, if you've seen a vacuum splint, it's going to be a similar thing typically. That you can get the patient to lay on there, and then you pull some air out, and it will help to kind of go, support the patient, mold around the patient so it's a little more comfortable. Yeah, again, this is, I say it all the time, unfortunately, in class, that EMS a lot of the time is a business, and so there's a lot of really cool equipment like vacuum mattresses that are out there that do a lot of good things, but you might not see them just because they're in frequent use and they're expensive. So maybe you'll have something like this, maybe you won't. Just know your equipment when you get out there. A bunch of different types of basket stretchers. These are probably not going to be commonly carried on an ambulance or most fire engines even. This is usually for tech teams, so rope rescue, high angle, low angle, water rescues, helicopter rescue teams, those kind of things. So you might see these out there, especially if you get into those kind of things. A lot of the time you can, if they have a suspected spinal injury, you'll do a backboard first and then place that into the basket. I'm sure you guys have all seen the video of the lady that went up in one of these things and just was spinning uncontrollably. Looked terrifying to me. Try to make sure that doesn't happen. Scoops we already talked about. One of my favorite pieces of equipment. Those are pretty cool. There's also isolettes for little neonates, little tiny babies, little newborns. These actually you'll have specialized ambulances that can carry the isolettes. And so they'll lift up into the back of the ambulance and they'll click in like the gurney. But these will do all sorts of things to help the NICU babies to stay warm, all that kind of stuff. So this isn't something you're typically just on your first day going to go handle, but you might see those out there, especially if you've been around for a while and start to get on those. Most of the time this is going to be kind of more a specialty team that's going to do NICU transfers and such if you have that capability. Make sure you're decontaminating your equipment. It's not something that we do as well as we should, in my experience in EMS. Especially if you're in a high volume system where you're at level 0. Level 0 means no additional ambulances ready. Maybe calls stacking up waiting for, for crews. Like maybe you're not going to decon as well as you should. But make sure that you are for yourself, right? Like I feel like there was a little bit of a shift post-COVID that we've gotten a little bit better about this, but you need to protect yourself. And when I'm thinking about myself, I have 2 little kids at home. I don't want whatever nasty stuff I just came in contact with to be left on the gurney or a piece of my equipment, and then I touch it with my bare hand later to move it or whatever, and now maybe I'm bringing that home to my family, right? When I'm talking about your safety, in this instance, it also extends to your family or those you're going to be around. And then the rest of your crew, your patient and further patients down the line, right? You don't want to put a patient onto a backboard that there's a patient who bled on it before and you didn't clean the blood fully off. So make sure you're taking the time, do a good job, decon your equipment so that you're stopping that spread as it goes along. There's a bunch of different types of patient positioning. It's really going to depend on most of the time on patient comfort. If you do have a patient in shock, we want them in the supine position. If I'm in shock, right now my body is working against gravity to perfuse my brain. So if we lay them flat, there's a little bit less work against gravity the body has to go through. So we're going to put shock patients supine. Usually it's going to be more like a Fowler or semi-Fowler position, so 45-degree angle somewhere in there. Again, just know your protocols as far as what you want. You have a head injury patient, they might want you to lift the head of the patient 10 to 15 degrees up to help for the head injuries. There's all sorts of different positions. But just, if the patient tells you, I have CHF and I can't lay flat, don't lay them flat. You know, you need to sit them up in that situation. You know, like follow the patient comfort and what the patient tells you that they need. Patients in the later stages of pregnancy, probably best to transport them on their left side. If they're on their back, the fetus can kind of sit on the vena cava and it can cause hypotension. And so on the left side, that takes the fetus off the vena cava and can kind of help with that. So just in general, most pregnant women sleep on their left side naturally because it helps with that. So if we're transporting with no spinal precautions or anything, left side, you can even, if you have a pregnant patient on the backboard, you can even prop the backboard up to be a little bit on the left side to help with this as well. You can put a patient in a recovery position. I'm not going to transport a patient in a recovery position most of the time. Even if they're unresponsive, I just don't feel like it's as safe with the straps. Just make sure you're cognizant and aware of airway issues and vomiting. That's why we put patients in the sideways, the recumbent, left lateral recumbent position for the recovery position in case they're vomiting, so that they vomit out of their mouth, not back into their throat and into their trachea. But just be aware of that if you're going to have them on their back. And then if they're nauseated or vomiting, in a position of comfort as well. Just be really cognizant. Maybe you have somebody who's head injured and has been vomiting, but they need to be on a backboard. You might need to prop that backboard up on the left side to kind of put them in that recovery position. Just always make sure you're maintaining a good, clear airway. Restraints are something that you may or may not be able to do. You probably will be able to do. You might have some stipulations like law enforcement needs to be there. Just make sure that you know your protocols as far as when you can use these restraints, and don't just go slap restraints on everybody. There might be reversible causes like we see here, right? Like hypoxia or hypoglycemia. Maybe that combative patient is combative because they have a medical reason for that. And we don't want to go put a patient at risk by putting them into restraints when we can just give them some oral glucose or give them some oxygen to help that issue. So make sure that you are thinking about those things before you put patients in restraints. I personally, in my last 7 years as a medic, I think I made the decision personally to put the patient in restraints maybe one time in all that time. For me, I would rather take the time to develop a patient rapport, try to talk the patient down. It doesn't always happen. For some reason, I'm good at it, but not everybody's going to be, and not every patient's going to allow it. But if possible, this is a last-ditch effort for me to keep myself and my crew safe. But I'm going to try everything I can to get around this if possible. So that's my personal philosophy. I don't like to just throw patients in restraints. Sometimes you do have to do it for your safety, patient safety, but if you can talk them through it, it's a good idea to do it. Local protocols might dictate when you can do restraints, different things about how they are restrained, documentation of restraints. One of the local protocols here, if the patient's restrained, there needs to be a law enforcement officer involved. Like you might have those, so make sure that you're looking at those. Typically, you're going to need at least 5 personnel, 1 for each limb and 1 to maybe manage the head. You don't want to, I've never seen somebody get bit, but I've seen somebody multiple times where a patient was attempting to bite somebody as they were being held down or being restrained. So you probably want somebody to help manage the head as well. But you should have somebody, one on each leg, one on each arm as you're putting these restraints on. And then we're always going to be restraining patients in a supine position, okay? We do not restrain patients in the prone position, especially if I have my hands behind my back, okay? If you understand the anatomy and physiology and the process of mechanical ventilation and how we breathe, then you should understand I breathe by my diaphragm going down, my intercostal muscles making my chest go out, and I expand my chest to breathe air in, okay? If I'm here with my hands behind, I'm already severely limiting how much my chest can expand out to get bigger. And then if I'm prone, then that's further affecting how much my chest wall can expand. So I'm sure don't need to bring up anything specific. You guys have seen, I'm sure, a bunch of stuff in the news about patients people dying because they're being restrained in that way. It's been a thing for a long time. We're not going to hog tie. We're not going to have people handcuffed or whatever on our gurney in the supine position. It's just not safe for the patient. So make sure that you're not doing that because it can cause asphyxia. You should have restraint to each extremity, and you need to be a hawk watching these patients to their restraints. We really need to be watching the ABCs, making sure that all that is good, really watching for those as this call is progressing. So make sure you're really vigilant about your reassessment of these patients. And then documentation is very important as well. If you're making that decision to place a patient in restraints, you better be able to document exactly why you did that and how you came to that decision of why you made that decision, right? That's an important thing to be able to document all of that. So some things to think about before you're going to move the patient. Think, is this something I can do? Am I strong enough to move this patient? Okay, like I said, leave your ego at the door. Your ego should not cause a patient to be injured because you think you're strong enough. So I have been on scene where we got there, we called a fire engine that brought 3 guys to come and help, and then all 5 of us were like, we're not okay with this. This is not going to be a safe move. We got a truck company. So I have been on the scene where we had 9 people there to move a patient because that was what we had to do to safely and effectively move this patient, and they were grossly stable and we could wait. So, leave your ego at the door, make sure you're doing the right thing for yourself and your patient and your crew, and just get that help if it's something that you can't do. Is there enough room for me to get a right stance? Are they up against the wall? Can I get in there, right? Take a little bit of time if you have to move that patient into the right area so that you can go and lift them properly. And remember, if you're injured, you're no good to anybody, right? And that's one of our founding principles for EMS is you need to be safe so you can help people, right? That's why anybody that's been in our class, and I'm sure any other class that does any of the skills, the first thing that they're going to do is come in and say, BSI, PPE is my scene safe, right? I'm thinking about my own safety. Because if I'm injured, if I can't help anybody, then now I'm just a patient. So make sure that you're not becoming a patient and do the right thing when you're going to move these patients for yourself and then down the line for the patient as well. All right, that was it for lifting and moving patients. Hopefully it gave you guys some insight on some things to think about for these lifting, moving, all that stuff. Like I said before, I really recommend you take a little bit of time. If you haven't, get into the gym, get a good workout routine. Start to build some of the strength up if you're in EMT school, because you're going to get out there and people are going to depend on you being able to lift and all that. So get out there and do that. And yeah, thanks guys, and we'll see you on the next one.